Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. This adorable project behind me is part of a You're in Words wall hanging club where you're getting one kit per month where we get to go learn some new ways to piece blocks and we get to do some applique. I always love that combination of being able to do both of those things in the same project. So hey, you are already in the club. Congratulations, that program is just about sold out, or maybe by the time you're watching this, maybe already sold out. We have a small amount of kits remaining. Hopefully you can grab one of those if you're not already in the club. But hey, even if you're not wanting to do either one of those things, we have a free download for you today where I will be talking about how to make a pieced heart block, which is great. You could be able to learn how to make that block and do anything you would want with that. Maybe a small little table runner, maybe make that even bigger into a Valentine quilt, or keep it nice and small. But it's just something fun to learn, new blocks where you can take that into another project. So I will be definitely talking a little bit about the kit. If you're not in the program, again, you can just fast forward. This is going to be a longer video. I'm going to basically take you from start to finish, from a kit that looks like this to a wall hanging that looks like that, including even the binding and the hanging tab on the back. So a longer video, we'll put that into sections. So if you know you just want to learn more about how did she do that applique, you can zoom ahead to that, or how did she put that hanging sleeve on the back? You'll be able to zoom ahead to that. So let's talk about just the pattern itself, which is also available just to purchase if you want to be able to use your own fabrics. Inside your pattern, which of course will be included in your kit, whether you're in the club or you happen, if you're lucky, to find one of those kits that's remaining that you can buy individually, your pattern, of course, will always include a color image of the project. And inside you'll have your instructions, and you'll also have some diagrams. Now, one of the things that we do at Shabby Fabrics, because we too are quilters and we know this is important, is we not only provide you with diagrams that have the shapes reversed for fusible applique, but we also provide you with an assembly diagram, which is really important for layout and alignment. More of that a little bit later on. Our pattern talks about the piecing first and then the applique second. So we will also follow that chronological order. Now what you're seeing on the table with me, and you know this is again a longer video because it's the first of 12, this is the applique thread set. So if you know that you want to be able to stitch your shapes down with a coordinating thread, just be sure to pick up that You're in Words wall hanging thread set. It'll serve you for all 12 of those. Even if you want to only buy some of those kits, if you are buying those individually, be sure to grab that thread set. You're always going to find something to do with this beautiful thread. It's sulky 50 weight cotton. I always love to be able to do piecing and top stitching with the 50 weight cotton. As we mentioned when we talked about the club, you need to have a hanger, and you really only need to buy one because the hanging sleeve on the back you'll be able to just remove this and insert that in the next month's project. So you don't need to buy 12 of these, just one will do the trick. This is the French curl. There's others available on the website if you prefer a different style. Of course, our normal supplies, but we'll be talking through that as we go. I want to dive into how to make the heart block. So our pattern talks you through cutting out your background first. Our background was cut. You need to get that main piece first, and then from the leftover fabric, we'll go ahead and cut our squares. We have two different size squares here. We have 1-inch squares. We need 24 of those and 12 of our 2.5-inch squares. So I'm going to make a block with you. This is what our block is going to look like. I'm going to show you that real quick. So that's where we're headed, and we make 6 of those. Each of those is with a different color, and you can see it goes from our deep red all the way to our just that soft baby pink. We have that echelon of colors, which I love. So I went ahead and cut my heart blocks here. Those are I think those are 2.5 by 4.5. Again, hey, that's on the download. So if you're like, that's all great, all I care about is how to make that heart block, go to the Shabby Fabrics homepage. On the very bottom, you'll see a link that says free download. Click on that and you're looking for the pieced heart block. That's going to have all the information that I'm talking to you about. That's both in the paid pattern and in the free download. So everything that I'm talking about, all those measurements are right here. You don't need to worry about writing that down. Just go ahead and download that if you'd like. So 2 of the same fabric, 2.5 by 4.5. And then each of those, as you can see, we have a small 1 by 1 inch square in each of the corners and the larger 2.5 inch square in those corners. The first step that we mentioned in our pattern is to go ahead and draw a line on the back side of the 1.5 inch squares, and you could do the same here. I'm going to give you a separate option though on this. I want to introduce a new tool to you, and that's how I went ahead and made my heart block called the corner clipper. I'm going to show you that once we get into the bottom portion of our heart, but let's just start off with, we drew a line. I just grabbed my friction pen, which I love because I know that I can just iron that away. If I misdraw a line, I've got my iron heating up on hot. So I'm just going to go ahead, heading to my machine. I've got a 50 weight cotton in there. It could be a cream, it could be a neutral, whatever you prefer to piece with. This is a confetti 50 weight. And I have just a regular top stitch 80-12 needle. I always recommend a fresh needle whenever you're diving into accurate piecing, and of course a fresh rotary blade. I have often made that mistake in the past, using maybe a rotary blade that was just a little bit dull. I was just like a little bit lazy to change it out. A little bit of a dull needle, and I just noticed my piecing was not where it should have been. I changed those things out, and I was amazed at the difference. It really does help. All right, so let's head over to our machine, and I'm going to sew. This needs to be positioned just very nicely right in that corner, and we are going to sew corner to corner on both of those. And I'm sewing on a, sometimes you can't always see, I'm sewing with the BERNINA 770 today, and I've got the 57D foot on there, and I've got the dual feet. In fact, I didn't have the dual feet engaged. I'm going to engage that. Such a neat feature on a BERNINA. It acts like a walking foot, but it just helps things flow so evenly through the machine. This is a very unique feature to the BERNINAs. Love that feature. Now, before I do anything else, I'm just going to go ahead and put another square. Notice these are coming in like this in the opposite corner, and we're going to sew again. Okay, what I like to do, I always press to the outside. If you're a quilter, I'm sure you do the same. Before I trim this away, this bulk, I always like to look, make sure I like what I'm seeing before I trim that away. So let's go look at that. I just press to the outside, because if you don't like what you see, or maybe you got off the line, just seam rip and go again. We'll do the same here. And I'm happy with that, so I will go ahead, lift that away, and just trim that. Now, as I'm trimming this, on the next squares that I'll be putting down here. Those are the 2.5-inch squares. We could absolutely turn them so that they're wrong side up again and draw the line like I did on the smaller ones. And of course I had done that ahead of time. Or you can use a tool called the corner clipper. It's a creative grid tool, and it's got that nice grip. If you've ever used any creative grid rulers, you know they kind of have this grip on the back. In fact, let me show it to you. It's right here. You can kind of hear it. And it just helps, it gets traction so that's not sliding around as you use it. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I've got a couple options. I always want to introduce you to options, and you can choose what you love. You might love the way that you probably learned, we all learned before these tools were ever invented, where you would draw the line just like this. And if this is going to be, I'm going to just press that again real quick. I want those laying good and flat for me. Okay. This one, of course, will go like this, and this line would be going, you know, like this to make this heart. I can absolutely do this where I go draw the line, so corner to corner, press to the outside. Do I like it? Yes. Trim it. Done. Let me give you an option here. So instead of drawing the line, we know that this is the part that we want, the part to my right is the part we want to trim away. Let me just take that line away. And if you ever get confused, like, oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to be trimming it the wrong way, all you have to do is just draw a quick line that reminds you this part is going to go away. This is the part. This is the cool thing about this ruler, or this tool, I guess I should call it. I'm going to lay this here just like this. Again, this is only an option for you. Don't feel compelled if you love the old school. Go ahead and trim that away. You could pin this or not. I'm not even going to pin it. This thing is already lined up and ready for me to start. So I want you to see this, just how incredibly accurate it is. More accurate than anything I really could do on my own. I think this tool is phenomenal, and anytime I have this where I would historically be drawing the line, I find myself doing that. Now, isn't that fantastic? So let's look at that again. We know it's this part over here. This part down here is what needs to go away. So we're just going to, once again, we lay our fabric down. If you can visualize it, you don't need to draw that line. If you have a difficulty envisioning, especially in the beginning, don't worry. Like, put lines where you know that's the part that's going to be cut away, so you don't inadvertently do that wrong. You've got this beautiful line going from corner to corner, helping you align properly. We go ahead and cut. Let's take that right to our sewing machine and repeat. And again, we will press to the outside. So this really is a time-saving thing. And you will definitely see me using more of the corner clipper throughout our series together here. Now, you know that you're going to be making a total of 6 hearts, so you would be using this, you could be absolutely using this up in these corners as well. You could use this tool a lot for this particular wall hanging. Okay, so we have our 2 halves, and now we'll simply place them right side together. If you're inclined to pin, go ahead and do that. I've got my patchwork pins. Get good pins. You are worth it. Your sewing is worth it. It makes a huge difference. a 1/4 inch seam, of course. Now, whenever you have something like this where it's like, which direction? That's one of those things where first I'm going to check, how do my points come together? I'm very happy with that. So if those got off at all, I would be seam ripping and doing that again. If that happens to, give yourself grace, right? We're all distracted, we're busy, we might not have pinned that as well as we could have. Don't be afraid to seam rip it. It's better to seam rip it now than regret not seam ripping it later and you're staring at this thing. It's already quilted and bound. You're not going to go back at that point. You really can't. So go ahead if you have that and seam rip when you need to. You will see me seam rip. I guarantee that. I use my seam ripper a lot. I'm going to go ahead and press that seam open because I want that block to be laying as flat as possible, and an even distribution of the bulk makes sense to me. So that's one block done, and you would repeat that for your blocks. Now this block at this time should measure 4.5. My ruler here is 4.5 by 8.5. So let's see if we did fill up that ruler laterally. Yes, so we're looking really good. Now I've sewn 4 of them together. What I recommend that you do, there's 6, is sew them in pairs. So the top 2 together, the middle 2 with the bottom 2, and then sew them together versus one just adding on and adding on. That's how things can kind of get a little bit of a bow. I've made that mistake a lot in my early quilting, and someone said, hey, sew them together in pairs and then sew pairs to pairs. And it'll help eliminate bowing, and that has definitely been true. So when we sew these together, you can see that this seam, we want that to be just this visual continuity without an interruption or break. So what I recommend once you lay them out, and you know this will be above that, is once they're right side together, I get my pins and I just take a look. I kind of get it lined up. And then once I believe that is stacked absolutely on top of each other, and I can again look from here, I'm going to pin here first. This is the intersection that matters the most to me and to you, is you want to have that nice continuity. And I'm going to pin in the corners. And again, let's go sew our 1/4 inch. What's beautiful about pressing a seam open is you see where that V is? That's exactly our 1/4 inch point. You're going to be looking for that as you sew these 2 blocks together. So sometimes I know exactly how I'm going to press, and sometimes I say, what's the fabric want to do? What's that mean? When I open this up, let's see where the fabric naturally wants to go. That, I can see this, some of the seam wants to go this direction, some wants to go here, or you could press open. Sometimes it's your choice. It truly doesn't matter. It's your preference. I think in this one, I feel like that seam is kind of wanting to go down, so I will go ahead and go with that. It's a bulky seam no matter what you do. So there's just certain seams that are like that. Give a good press and press from this side. And then we can stitch that together. In fact, I'll do that real quick and come back so that because we're going to build this whole thing together. So again, just a reminder, we're going to I'll stack that right up on top. I take one last look right there, making sure everything's looking good. Pin in the center first, then in my corners. Okay, I'm happy with that. So let's go ahead, press that. We'll keep pressing that. Oh, it looks like, you know what? It looks like I started pressing this direction, so I think I am. You know, it doesn't matter. When you think about pressing, if I had interlocking seams next to it, I might reverse that seam right there, but I don't. I'm only going to be putting a piece of just this polka dot right next to it. So really the direction that you press the seam doesn't matter. You're just going for as flat as possible. But I can see when I built this yesterday, I was traveling in this direction and today I traveled in this direction. Again, reality quilting, right? I could change that so everything is traveling in the same direction, but I don't think that looks bad with these moving this direction and that moving down. Your preference. Okay, that first part is done. Now for our next part, where I'm going to go ahead and clean up the table a bit. We'll go ahead and move the thread off. I'll be using certain colors of my thread, absolutely. But we'll get to that much later on. I'll grab the colors that make sense. I'm going to bring out my light box. While I'm doing that, what you would be doing, and what I will also do off camera, is your diagram has 2 pages. You have these arrows for alignment so that you're able to align the 2 pages, and if you need to use the light box to assist you to see that, by all means do it, and go ahead and tape that together. Notice the right side is the tracing diagram portion. If you're buying the Shabby Fabrics kit, you will never use that unless you made this again in maybe some other fabrics. The part you're after is the assembly diagram, because we've already cut out those pieces for you. In fact, let me show you that part of the kit. I will also take care of that while I'm off camera and get those prepared. Inside your kit, you will be getting your shapes. These come very kind of nested, as we call them. So they are, you just pop them out just like this. There's your V. You'll just continue to do that. I highly recommend, please listen to my words. Just keep a little tray or a little bowl and put this extra piece right in there. Sometimes the pieces are so small, you think that you got everything out of there and you maybe throw that away, only to find out later when you start to assemble, oops, there's a tiny little heart or a little circle there that you didn't notice. So please keep that handy in case that is the case. And once you're done with everything, by all means, toss it. So just continue to pop those letters out. And then the fastest way to just release the fusible webbing that's on the back, look at this A. Can you imagine trying to cut this out by yourself and have it be so clean, and you know that inside cut is difficult. To remove the paper, my favorite method is just to kind of fold that over with my thumb and see how the paper just released. It makes it a lot simpler. So let me show you that again. Versus trying to just dig in there, go ahead and again, just fold that over like that with my thumb, and you see how that immediately released the paper. So go ahead and pop out all your shapes, have them all ready to go, get your diagram all taped together. If you want to trim that apart, you can, or leave it intact. You prefer. When we come back, this will be cleared away. We'll have the light box out, our shapes will be ready to go, and we'll be moving right into our applique. Per the pattern, we have you oversize the background cut. We had you cut that straight away to 7.5 by 25.5, and it says that that'll be trimmed when the applique is complete. So we give you a little bit of a bigger size and then trim it down later. So go ahead and have that ready to go as well. I'll be right back, and we're going to move straight into applique, and we're going to continue putting our wall hanging together. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the applique portion of our wall hanging. I've got the pages taped together. I've got the shapes punched out. I confirmed I have everything. That's something you might want to consider doing. I went ahead and put my layout diagram, and I just put all the pieces out to understand where they went, made sure I had everything before I moved off the little bit of the fabric that was left over after I punched out the shapes. Also inside your kit, there's a little note about instructions for laser cut kits. It's very easy to want to crank that iron up to full hot. If you're a quilter, that's what we do. But with laser cut, using heat and bond light, anytime you're doing fusible, whether you've done that by hand or laser cut, same thing really, is the manufacturer's recommending a medium heat for that versus the full hot. Going too hot could make the adhesive fail. So you want to be careful about that. Now you see two things out there in front of me. Those are applique pressing mats, and I've got two different sizes, and there's a reason for that. We're going to see that here in just a moment. I've limited space, so we're going to do our very best. I want to point out one thing, and I'll turn the light off. It might be a little bit easier for you to see. Basically, we've got the frame of the size of the fabric that we asked you to cut, and I believe that was a 7.5 by 25.5, yes. So that's the size of that frame. So your fabric, your background is going to fit right into that like a puzzle piece. It's easier to deal with the V in the heart, for example, here, if it's just one piece. Look here on the L. We have the L, we have the heart and the bow, which by the way, on your diagram is showing as two separate pieces. We realized when we were creating these laser shapes, why not make that one shape for you? So as a courtesy, we did go ahead and join that into one shape, so it's really, you know, pieces 5 and 6 joined, but that knot right in the middle, you want to really deal with that as a single unit. For that reason, and before we put our background piece out and try to lay everything out all at once, I'm recommending you go ahead and use the smaller applique sheet, and let's put the V and the heart together as a unit. Let's put the L, the heart, the ribbons, and the bow together as a unit. And anytime there's two pieces or more, you pre-assemble that and put it off to the side. The end with the heart, pre-assemble that and put that off to the side. So let me show you how that works. We will go ahead and put our big applique mat aside. We don't need to use anything that big right now because we're just going to be using that. And I really don't need the light box because I'm just gonna kind of push this over to the side, kind of, again, with my limited space here. I want you to be able to see that my iron is heating up to medium. And I've got my pressing mat down. Your diagram will go next, followed by your applique pressing mat. That's the sequence. So if you have any difficulty seeing that, you can absolutely bring this over. This is why you may be tempted to trim off this bottom portion because it's just something we're going to have to keep dealing with. Kind of bumps us, it's kind of in our way. Just remember, you cannot iron on a light box at this point. These will melt. Now this is the Wafer 3. This is the biggest light box that Daylight currently offers, and it's really ideal for this project. Most projects that are not this long and the Wafer 1 or 2 would work, but for this project, the 3 is ideal. I'm just going to bring it over here because I can see my letter V, and this has a really cool stickiness to it. By the way, as you use your applique pressing mat and you're just using it, you might leave it out, it might get dusty, no problem. Throw it in your dishwasher, I almost said washing machine, no, not washing machine, dishwasher, run it through your regular cycle, take it out, and it's supposed to be as good as new, and it'll be tacky again, and I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna put my V down, and I'm going to show you this tackiness. You see this? I can lift this thing up, and this isn't going anywhere. That's a really cool feature because a lot of applique pressing sheets that are out in the market are actually very slick, and the slightest bump, your shapes move. I love that I've got a little bit of help to keep things in position while I'm trying to iron things down, trying to align them for that. And again, I will go ahead and just push that down. Now with my medium heat, I'm just going to go directly on top of my shape, holding that straight down, don't do any sliding, and you're going to be here for about 6 to 7 seconds. Once you're done with that, you can go ahead, and it's really important that you go ahead and let the glue transfer happen. These two shapes are now melting together. And you need to go ahead and let that process just happen and cool down before you start to peel that away. Let that cool down. I've definitely peeled that away too soon. The next shape I'm going to do here is this. I can just lift this up and move it. Let that just cool down and we can keep working. So L is going to go down next. And I can see that footprint. And I know your diagram, as I said 4 and I think 5 and 6. Let me see what is that? 5 and 6, and we again just said, hey, why don't we merge that together, make it even simpler for customers, so they have a fun time of creating this project. We're going to lay this down, and then there's a little knot. Remember how I said keep your fabric, because some of the shapes are so small you don't even recognize them, and it's very simple, very easy to lose them. This is one of those where you maybe don't even recognize that it's going to be part of the project. And that's the knot. Notice I can't see through my L to see where that is. I can either refer to my photo as guidance, I can remove that L, kind of take a quick glance, take a memory. You could take a picture with your phone of the diagram and you're referencing that. So there's some ideas. So let's go ahead again. We'll let that stay on there for, it's 6 seconds. And we'll remove that and that will be melted. In the meantime, I can just peel this away and look how that's now 1 unit. Absolutely no residue whatsoever on my applique pressing sheet, and you can see from above that shininess, all the glue is still with this. Nothing has been transferred to our applique pressing mat. You got all of it back, which you absolutely want to have the best grip that you can have. All right, I'm gonna let that cool just a little bit longer. We will definitely be using it. This is now where I need to use the bigger pressing or the bigger light box, and I definitely need this for a guide. I'll go ahead and turn my light on. I've already cut my background to that exact size. Remember we did that in the beginning. Before we cut our backgrounds, and I want you to do this throughout the whole program. Cut your background first, and then afterward go ahead and cut your squares or rectangles or whatever you're going to be using for your piece blocks. Okay, so that's in position. Now just remember that you want to have your pressing mat nearby. It could be you're using maybe a blanket. Whatever that is, you want to be able to easily slide that over and be able to press things down. Now, I know from where I am at, my vantage point, I might only be able to get V to N at this point and move it over because I don't have a way to move this whole thing in front of me. But I would build that in my own space at home because I have that space. So I really want to encourage you to make sure wherever you're doing this applique, you have plenty of space and can move it all without bumping the shapes. Okay, so isn't that nice now that this is one thing now instead of being multiples, and I can easily see through my light box, and I'm just beginning now to lay that out. Once you feel like, you know what, I only want to do maybe three letters at a time, do whatever's comfortable for you. I peeled this one off. Lay that down. If we say, you know what, let's break this into 3. I only want to deal with this amount, then no problem. Simply rotate this over. And just like before, your 6 seconds again. Okay, once that's done, we rotate back. I'm going to put the E-N-T, I-N-E, get all of that done. Our next step after that, because it's the same process, I'll just do that again because there's a lot more coming up. After this, that's when you would historically go ahead and grab your favorite thread out of that beautiful thread set and go ahead and do whatever machine applique you prefer. It could be a straight stitch, it could be a blanket stitch. I went ahead and loaded a red in here. I also have some red in the bobbin. You know, if you've got your tension right in the bobbin, you don't even really need to have the colored thread in the bobbin. I just went ahead and did it because I had a red bobbin in the room with me. But I don't always do that. But sometimes if my tension isn't exactly right, I see that white bobbin thread kind of poking up. So if you're inclined to go ahead and have the same color in the bobbin, don't wind a full bobbin. You don't want to, you probably don't need that much. But I do have red in the top and the bottom. You have a choice. You could go ahead and stitch your shapes down now, or you can go ahead, iron everything down. We're going to trim this up. That would be our next step, is to trim it to 6.5 by 24.5, and this is the Creative Grid ruler I will use because this does measure 6.5 by 24.5. I love it when I have a ruler. That is the exact footprint that I'm looking for. It's the ideal situation, but it doesn't always happen that way, right? Sometimes we have to cut a size that's not any ruler, and we have to kind of cut one side at a time. Now I'll be able to, boom, lay that out. Where I'm going with this is you might want to wait. Once this is cut out to the 6.5 by 24.5, and you sew this on the side of that, and you put your batting and your backing, you might want to stitch down your applique then. It gives it a very quilted look because you're going through your batting and into your backing. So that's something you can decide. We've done it both ways. I will today, for today's purposes, go ahead and do a little bit of machine applique just so you can just see that happen. But I just wanted to mention that to you as a possibility. Okay, when we come back, where I will be is I'm going to have all of my letters down, and we will now be at this step that we're going to go ahead and square this up. And we give you a couple options for that as well, maybe some things to think about. We will go ahead and square this up together. And then our next step will be to go ahead and do a little bit of machine applique and keep progressing toward getting our wall hanging finished up. Okay, see you in just a moment. Okay, so we're now at the step where we have everything's appliqued. I've got my pressing mats off of the table, light box, a lot more space. So we're now at the second page of our pattern. Right at the very top, assemble the wall hanging using the cover photo as your guide. Lay out the hearts. We did that. I got excited, got ahead of myself. Sew the blocks together, press open. Trim your applique background to 6.5 by 24.5, or to the same length as your heart block unit, because really that's king, right? Well, so if let's say that you sewed with a scant quarter, it's possible that your blocks are a little bit bigger, or maybe you sew with a little bit of a chunkier and maybe you're not quite 24.5, maybe you're 24.25. That's fine. Whatever that is what that is. And sometimes just by repressing, remember that we have a lot of seams here. So let's check to see what I've done. Now it's a true test of what I've been doing here. Let me put this to the side. Let's measure what we have. And again, a lot of times, if you're shy of a measurement by maybe 1/8 of an inch, it's probably pressing. Repressing that will probably do the trick. So we have a 24.5 inch ruler, and you see how when this is kind of relaxed, all of those seams kind of just draw up just a little bit. But as I lay this out, I do have that 24.5. I will. So let's just repress seams, because you know how there's a lot of bulk. You can always take see this is a distance. This is absolutely a distance, and when you have that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, it starts to add up. So we can always press again. So I'm very satisfied that if I trim this up to 6.5 by 24.5 with this awesome Creative Grid ruler, I'm going to be on the money. And that's really where we want to be. By the way, these will all measure the same in length. So you will be using this ruler if you invest in it. And this is my go-to ruler whenever I'm cutting anything. So, we know we cut this to 7.5. But no matter what it is, I'm just going to go ahead. This is an idea. This is an idea. You can just lay the ruler down and go for it. Or if you're, you know, want to be as specific as I like to be, I'm just going to make a crease because I'm just trying to find the center. With certain months, it's very easy to find the center and line up along certain letters, but other months maybe not so much. So I'm going to find that center. Now I know that if my ruler is 6.5, half of that is going to be 3 1/4 right there. And I'm going to line that up 3 1/4 here and 3 1/4 here, top and bottom. And I'm just going to look at that. Now that's the first measurement laterally. But now I want to look at how far is my ruler up above my V and below my E. And you're going to just try to balance that out to be the same amount of distance. So if that is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to scoot that down just a touch. Now, when you believe you're at your spot, you can either just start cutting, or again, an option for you if you're like, I don't know about this. I want to remove my ruler and look at this. Go ahead and use your friction pen and draw that footprint if you're more comfortable with that. You can absolutely do that. Now at home, I have a space where I can kind of move around the project myself, where I don't have to use, like, no problem making this cut. This cut's very awkward. And this cut for me, I'd have to literally come around on the other side of the table to make that cut. So for me, drawing that line is really handy because that's really where I'm going to actually end up cutting this thing because I'm going to have to move this. So let's go ahead and cut this. I'm comfortable doing this cut up here, but there's no way this cut, I would never attempt that. That is so not safe. So let's go ahead, flip that, and now I'm really happy I have the drawn line. Now keep in mind, the edge of my ruler is my 6.5. So that's the beauty of using this ruler, is I don't really necessarily need to draw that line. But if you wanted to remove that and just look at that, get another opinion, you can hold it up to your husband, your whomever, your friend. What do you think about this? You know, maybe your wife. And then they're like, yeah, that's aligned. Then cut. Well, Mama said measure twice, cut once. I have sometimes failed that advice and regretted that. So I'm going to double check myself. I've lined up. Let's cut it. And then we're going to get right into doing a little bit of machine applique. Of course, I'm just going to dabble in that just a touch, just to give you a visual of what that might look like. And I've got a blanket stitch planned. Hey, if you love different types of stitching, throw your personality into it. How fun that you know, jump into the Facebook group, especially if you're doing some really fun stitching. Inspire other people to take that risk, move those dials, and try those different fancy stitches on our sewing machine that we rarely, if ever, use. So it's a great opportunity. So I think that since I've loaded this color in here, maybe I'll just start. It's probably not a perfect match. I just kind of, yeah, that's probably a really good one actually. I'm going to start with my A because I think that's just a better match. I'd probably pick a different shade. I'm going to really start, you can kind of think about where you want to begin and end. Sometimes there's an advantage. Here I don't see that. I'm just going to start anywhere. And of course, practice on a scrap piece of fabric to make sure you have the length and width that you prefer. So let's get started. Whenever you feel like I always feel like I have to stop and turn But if you feel like you can do that without stopping, by all means, you know your comfort level with machine applique. Now I'm going to raise my needle up because it's not really where I want it to be right there. There we go. And you just slowly work your way around your letters. Some people, as an option, this is probably a project you're never going to wash, might do a straight stitch just around the edge. A straight stitch is something we all understand. It's still attractive. And you know, because we're not going to be really washing these projects, you don't need to worry about that edge fraying. If no one's touching it, it's not going to fray. Okay, so you've seen some machine applique. What we'll do, so we can keep moving, is, of course, you would do this whole thing at this point. You'd stitch that down in the perfect thread, whatever's in your thread set. And now we go ahead, right sides together, pin, and I'm going to sew that into one unit, definitely with this up top. There's a tool called the thing. It's the purple thing. If you need that to kind of press those seams down, so as the presser foot's coming in and not rolling those seams that are laying in this direction, by all means use that, or just kind of pause and get that down with your fingers or a needle to kind of hold that down. You can also pin anything that's like that. One strategy is you can come in at an angle with a pin and it helps keep that down. So I'm going to pin here and here because we know that has to happen. I'll sew that 1/4 inch and I'll be pressing toward this background because there are no seams over there. That's where this will naturally want to sit. The next step, of course, would be grabbing some batting or fusible fleece as well as your backing to go ahead and layer and do whatever quilting you want to do. Some free motion quilting would be fun. And then our next step after that, of course, will be to go ahead and do binding and our hanging sleeve. One thing I will do, and I want to show it to you, is once I add the batting and the backing to this project, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more machine applique so I can show you what that will look like if you're considering that option. And we'll stitch that around through the batting and the backing so you can just see how embossed that looks and decide if that's maybe something that you want to try for your own wall hanging. So I'll go ahead and get this sewn together, get ourselves some batting, get our backing ready to go, and we will be moving right onto that step. We'll be stitching around another letter, binding, and then our hanging sleeve. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I let the seams tell me where they want to press. Sometimes they don't get to tell me, but sometimes they do, and you can see that this just wants to go here because of all the bulk. So we will comply with that and just press that over. This is already very pretty. Next up is backing and batting. So if you love to use warm and natural, which is what's in most of our projects, and I'm sure what's probably hanging there. I want to talk to you about a new product on the market that Clover came out with because they knew we were all digging in the drawer, our junk drawer, for safety pins, pinning our top to our batting to our backing, right? We've all done that. We grab our warm and natural, and it doesn't have any adhesive characteristics, but we have to have it all kind of stick together so that we can do our free motion quilting. Well, thank you, Clover, that they came out with Wonder Pins. They're quite new on the market, so you might not have even heard about them yet. So if you do your own machine quilting, think about these. They're super sharp. They go in beautifully through all layers, pop back up, and you just leverage that close. And it's just really nice. They come in the pink and the yellow, and I think a box of those has 20 in that. So just an idea if you love to do your own machine quilting and you're using a non-fusible batting. Now what I have with me today, because I'm not going to do any machine quilting with you, I want to get right into the binding and the hanging sleeve that's on the back. So I'm going to be using a double-sided fusible fleece that's going to hold everything together for us, and we'll just talk through, you can see the details. You could get very fancy and do some nice swirls and details. Do whatever makes you happy with that. We have our backing. Right side is down, wrong side up. I have a double-sided fusible fleece here. And then we have our pieced top. One thing I do want to mention to you is if you do decide to use a double-sided fusible batting or fleece, is try to just not have it have contact with your iron, or maybe put a pressing cloth down, especially because it's kind of sticking out to the side. It can make a little bit of a mess, so I just want to mention that to you. I typically have a much larger, when I'm doing something like this, ironing surface, and I like to start in the middle and work my way out. And if you need to steam it just a touch to get all the layers together, don't worry about that. You can absolutely do that, and it won't harm any of the applique that you've done. All right, so we'll iron that together, and then you can decide. This is where that step would be if you decided to do your machine applique at this point, and I wanted to show that to you so that you could at least see what that might look like. I will keep ironing this together to make sure that I have that smooth on both sides. When I come back, I'm going to be at the sewing machine. I'll have my blanket stitch set up. I don't have that set up quite yet. And let's just go ahead and stitch around the E, for example, and you can see what that stitching will look like. After that, we'll go ahead and trim around. We'll just pretend this is quilted. We would, of course, do little loops or swirls or whatever you want to do, and then we would prepare our binding strips. For our binding strips, I will be using my 2.5 by 24.5 inch because that's the size I like to cut my binding strips to. So I know I'm going to need at least 2 of those. So I'll get those ready to go when we come back. I'll be at the sewing machine once I have this pressed together and it's set up for the blanket stitch. So just so that this is more central, I'll go ahead and do the E. And let's see here. I might as well just start on the inside of that. If I've got a needle down feature, which I do, I'm going to start right there. And I can feel the stiffness of this. It's definitely more work to do it when it's quilted because it's not as pliable. But notice how I just rolled it up. It's not a big deal. By the way, backings and kits will vary. So if your backing is different than this, I'm not surprised. But it's always first quality, beautiful fabric and something that would be pretty. So. Okay, well, while the camera's still kind of closer up, I want you to see that. So, and by the way, on the back, you would want to coordinate your thread to match here. I had white in the bobbin, but if you are going to go ahead, and some people don't care what the back of a project looks like, but if you do, you might want to coordinate with your backing. So this one, as we did before, and this one we did all the way through the batting. So it is a little bit of a different look, so you can decide what's best for you. Now, with regard to the rest of this, we'll go ahead and pan over the project and show you the quilting that was done in our specific wall hanging. So if you want to do something similar or identical to that, you'll be able to get a good vantage point and get some ideas of what you could do with your project. I will go ahead and move on though now to the point where we are ready to trim this up and put our binding on, even cut our binding strips. So I will now just bring out my big ruler once again, and I am going to go ahead and just trim this up. I like to use the lines on my mat so that my project is as square as it can be. Anytime I've done any kind of quilting, it ends up, I'm like, but I was so square. It ends up just a little bit not as square as going into it, because I think that's the process of that can happen during quilting. So I'm going to square this up because I want my wall hanging to be square. Now I'm going to trim the bottom. That'll help me get guidance because I can't see over that edge because of my project being too long. So I'm going to square this up here, which I can see. And there we go. I like that. There's my measurement. Okay, so that's our project going into our binding. Now, as I mentioned, with the binding here, if you love 2.5-inch strips, this 2.5-inch ruler is fantastic. I know some people like to quilt with 2.25-inch binding strips. That is also a common size. Still a great ruler to have because it has this nice profound 1/4-inch line for you. If you're going to be cutting 2.25-inch strips instead of 2.5, you're just going to lay that beautiful dashed line right along there and cut your strips. For those of us that really like that 2.5-inch strip, you're just going to lay that along there and go ahead and cut your strip. So that's really convenient. The other thing too is if you ever want to make your own jelly roll, like let's say you have a pattern that calls for jelly roll. You know, we all have cabinets full of fabric, but maybe you don't have a specific jelly roll still available. This makes it so easy to cut your own jelly roll. And there you go. You know, you're ready to proceed with a jelly roll pattern, and you were able to cut your own perfect 2.5-inch strips, again with the Creative Grid, and it's got the grip on the back. So just something to think about adding to your sewing room. Now, the corner clipper is a really cool tool even for binding strips. And when someone told me that, I'm like, what are you talking about? Historically, and I'm going to clean off these edges just with a straight edge. Historically, when we joined binding strips, the way I was taught, and probably the way you were taught, you just clean off this edge, and we'll go with how we learned and we'll go with this cool tool and why it's my new favorite way to join binding strips, and I don't do it any other way now. The way I learned was this first binding strip is right side up. And the next binding strip was 90 degrees, just like that. And I'd have to scoot it over so I could see my corner, so I could just barely see that corner. I put my straight edge there. It wouldn't be at the corner clipper. I'd grab a different ruler. Let me grab one real quick here so it looks more realistic to you. Grabbing a straight edge, and I try to scoot that back over so I know where it belongs. And I'm trying to draw this line, pin it, move, like just kind of creep over to my sewing machine, and invariably that would shift, and sometimes my strips wouldn't end up being just exactly in line. Corner clipper takes all of that nonsense away, okay? So here, strips both right side up right now. Both right side up. What I love about this is when I take this to here, just like that, these strips are both right side up, stacked. I make my cut. Now, when I bring them together like this, they are perfect. Not approximate, they are truly perfect. So now I put my pin in, and I do need to change my thread. I still had that pink thread in there, and I'm going to change that out for regular thread at this point. And you know what? Actually, red's I'm going to change that to red since I'm doing binding at this point. But isn't that fantastic? I'm not messing around. The corner clipper makes it so, I don't dread doing binding strips anymore or joining binding strips. It's actually fun. So let me go ahead and change out my presser foot back to my 1/4 inch. Let's get some red thread on there. We're going to join that binding strip, and we're going to go ahead and sew that to our project. I'll be right back. So we're at our sewing machine, and we're just going to sew our strips together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's see how we did. Let me trim off some thread here. So isn't that nice that I just love it. Like I said, joining binding strips has always been like, oh, and now it's not such a big thing anymore. So I like to press my seam open. And the nice thing too about the corner clipper is the way that it kind of trimmed those off. They just lay beautiful and flat. They're not sticking out beyond the binding strip where I have to trim something away. So that's what that looks like. Isn't that fantastic? Okay, wrong sides together just like we've always done. All the way down. When you start your binding, and of course I've done a whole tutorial on binding. There's lots and lots of choices. So really, however you want to get your binding onto your project, the main thing is you don't want to roll it around to the back of the project and sew it down now. You definitely want to sew on the front of your quilt versus the other way. I have seen people bind from the back, roll to the front. For this time, it won't work. You need to go ahead sewing the binding to the front and securing to the back, but don't secure yet until we attach our hanging sleeve, which will be tucked up into the top of the project. Then, once that's attached and secured, which we'll go into shortly, that's when we are okay to go ahead and roll the binding back to the back and either tack that down by hand or by machine at that point, as you prefer. So that's one thing to start thinking about with regard to, just get your binding on the way you like. Okay, so I'm going to sew the binding on with my favorite technique. One thing I want to encourage you to do is start somewhere maybe closer to the side and more in the middle. Don't start a binding in a corner. It really doesn't work out well at all. So I'm going to leave a nice big flap open because my favorite technique is kind of that invisible binding. You can't really see the slice. It's nicely hidden. So I'm just going to leave a big flap there, and I don't necessarily kind of clamp that down. I definitely use my Wonder Clips once I roll it to the back and I'm stitching it down by hand or machine. But if you're inclined and you want to go ahead and clip that at this point, be sure to do that. I'll show you the technique in the corner. It's easier to show you off of the machine than on the machine. As we approach the corner, when you're a 1/4 inch away from that corner, and if you want to mark it, by all means, if you want to grab a friction pen and literally mark it, you can. Especially if you're a beginner and you're like, I don't know that place. I don't know what a 1/4 inch looks like, but I do know what it looks like if I measure it. Well, that's the beautiful thing about this nice profound line right here is that's your 1/4 inch. So once you're a 1/4 inch away from that, and I'll just mark it, what the heck? We're learning right now. We're learning options. I'm going to stop right there. Once I do that, I will cut my thread. Then I'm going to roll this strip back on a 45-degree angle, just like this. Roll this back on top of itself, going right here along the bottom. I've seen people, you've got 2 options. Start sewing a 1/4 inch away from the edge, and I've seen people start right off the edge. So I've seen, and it seems to work out both ways. So if you want to try this as a technique, if that's something you've never tried, go ahead and give it a roll. But this is what I'm going to go ahead and get my binding completed and on my project, and I'll show you how I finish this up in the end in case you're curious of what that technique is. Okay, so I'm going to leave a nice big tail. In fact, I'm going to start further down, and we'll get started. Now here's my corner coming. I moved my strip just a bit when I started, so my mark is down here. If you're sewing on a BERNINA, do you see this notch right here? I can put my fingernail in it. When that notch is a beam here, you're a 1/4 inch away, and that's where you should stop. If you're not on a BERNINA, you don't have that notch, you could again mark it, or you just kind of know that's your 1/4 inch right there. So let's just kind of approach that slowly, back up, cut our thread. I'll show you the one miter the one time, and then I'll go ahead and do those others off camera just to speed us up. Lay that back, like I mentioned. Hopefully you can see that right there. I definitely want you to see it. I'll turn to the side so you can see it. Lay that back. Lay this down, now going in this direction. Hopefully I gave enough. Get this out of the way, so it's a little awkward doing it on a position that's not, I can't exactly see it straight on because I'm trying to move it so you can see it. Now we're going in this direction, and I am going to just start off the end and come in. Let's see how that works out. That's different than I've done it in the past, but I've heard people say they have just as good success doing that. Let's give it a try. Now, as I come down this side, this is where the join is going to be. I want to encourage you to leave a plenty gap here, a plenty big enough gap, probably at least 6 inches in here, maybe a little bit more. So I'm going to come in here and probably stop right about in here, and then I'll talk you through one idea of how to join those strips, and it looks beautiful. Okay, now how do we join these binding strips? As I said, you may have your own technique. Zoom through this, just join them however you love. But there's something called a magic binding technique that it's magic. It's pretty cool. So basically this nice big gap, and if you find when you try this at home, if you find that your strips are too close, you could seam rip out a little bit. I think I did that just a touch because I know I was remembering I need more distance. Okay, remember how we started here? Well, just to start off with, trying to figure out, this is where this is. We probably want to join it right about in here. We're just going to lay the fabric back onto itself with a 1/4 inch gap. Now my ending here is pretty short. We'll see if we can make it work with this. If not, no problem, just plucking out a few seams, or a few threads here, so we have a little bit of a longer length. But let's see if we can make it, we'll see if we can make it work with what we've got. Let me trim that off. All right, so we're going to iron this, fold this back onto itself, fold this back onto itself, with a 1/4 inch gap, 1/4 inch. And it doesn't have to be a perfect quarter, but as close as you can make it. And we're going to give this a good press, a really good press. Hopefully my iron didn't cool down on me. Yeah, I think it did there. You want to be able to see your lines specifically. This technique is dependent on that. All right. And that's our hanging sleeve. So I think I'd love to have a stronger press, but I think we can go with that. You're going to want this handy. I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to need this and a marking tool and my rotary cutter. I'm going to be using those tools here shortly. This is the side we started on. Go ahead and pivot that out and have that be open. You know, I want a stronger crease right there. It's so important that you see this, otherwise you won't understand it. By the way, we've recorded a whole video on magic binding. So if this is difficult to see, you want to be able to watch it at a separate time, that's a whole thing you can watch by itself. Again, is the magic binding video. Go to YouTube, type in magic binding shabby fabrics, and you'll be able to watch the video. So this is kind of the quick version of that. All right, so we'll pivot this out, and you can see from the overhead camera we have a very strong crease here, and we have a line here, so kind of a bullseye right there. So we'll pivot that out. With this side, which we have the same, okay? So one will stack on top of another, and sometimes you have to almost bring the project in because it's attached. So that can be a little awkward, even if you want to kind of tack that in. Maybe use a Wonder Clip or something just to kind of help you out, hold it down. So let's find that. There's that intersection again. I wish, again, it was a little more profound. I can see it. Hopefully you can see it too. What I'm trying to do is stack this plus sign on top of that plus sign. So let's see if we can get this stacked correctly, properly. And you have to kind of take a, oh, I'm off by a touch. that fits there. And adjust that ever so slightly. Oh, I need to come down this way a little bit. Okay, once you've found that intersection, now what you'll do, I'm going to hold that steady, is from this corner to this corner, move that out of the way, I'm now parallel to my project. So hopefully you can see that. Let me make sure I didn't shift anything. While I grab for that ruler, I might have shifted just a touch. So you can imagine these should be right angles to each other for this to work. Now you're going to draw the line, and notice I'm running parallel to my project. If you end up doing this backwards, which I have actually done multiple times on other quilts, and maybe even this one for all I know, the great news is you just seam rip and try again. No big deal. But once you get it right, it feels great and it looks fantastic. Let's put some pins in. We don't want this to move. One more in there. I definitely don't want any movement. So let's take this to our machine, and we're just going to stitch on that line that we've drawn. Let's make sure we don't get any tucks in there. I can see I should have left a greater tail. See that? Having a longer tail is really important. So it's just less shuffling here. Make sure I'm still lined up. Okay, now don't get near that rotary cutter yet. We have to see if what we did worked. Like I said, I've often drawn the line the wrong direction. It just didn't work out. Let's see if once we trim that, is that going to lay where it should? Now let me unclip this. And it looks like it's going to lay exactly correct, which is wonderful news. Okay. What does that mean? How do we trim this thing? So let's bring this back. So we will take that to our table with a straight edge. Once you're certain we can just lay that open and iron that. Probably could have done that with a corner clipper now that I'm thinking about it, because then I wouldn't have these little dog ears. That's okay, we'll just trim those away. So that's the magic binding. A little awkward, but I made it more awkward than it needed to be because I didn't leave long enough tails. So now you can see that once that's done, you just go finish that. So why not leave a really big gap? Easier to work with, it's not as crowded. So let me go ahead and stitch that down so I know that that side is done, and we'll move on to our hanging sleeve. There we go. And just so you see it, I mean, isn't that beautiful? From the overhead camera, it's right here. It would be very difficult for someone to pick that out. So it's a great technique. If you've never tried it, give it a shot. Even if you mess it up the first time, keep trying. It's worth the effort. Okay. What's about this hanging sleeve? Well, we need to have that in the back so we can have that beautiful French curl hanger. So going back into our instructions, they had us cut that when we cut our binding to go ahead and cut our piece to 2x9. What did I do with that fabric? Let's see here. I might have moved it off of my table. No problem. We can cut a new strip. And that's the nice thing is we give you plenty of fabric. We'll just cut another one. No problem. Oh, here it is, off to the side. In my desire to clean up, I moved it. All right. What's that over there? Our corner clipper has served us so well. One of my favorite tools. Step one with our hanging sleeve is to go ahead and put that wrong side up. And our first step is to press a 1/4 inch up either side. I'm going to be using something called the hot ruler, another amazing Clover Notion. I want that to be nice and even on the back. With this tool, right there's my 1/4 inch. What I love about that is versus me trying to guess that 1/4 inch, I'm fairly accurate, but it tends to kind of do this on the way down. What I love about this tool is I can lay this down. Oh, I'm going to go over just a touch more. And it's nice and straight and even. It looks very professional. After all of this effort, we want our project to look incredible, hanging on our wall, and nice and even and level. So you having a nice, even, level hanging sleeve is really important. So this is the hot ruler. I'll remove that and press it again. And isn't that fantastic? I don't have to shy away from heat with the hot ruler. It is built to take maximum heat on your iron and not fail. So this is a one-time purchase. So the next step in there, step 2, is to press a 1/4 inch in on either end. So again, now instead of using the 1/4 inch, I'll be using my 1/2 inch mark here. So when I fold this in, this is the new line I'm looking for, is this one. And isn't that nice? I don't usually use a 1/2 inch measurement, so I don't have to guess where that is. My tool is going to help me find that perfectly. There it is. So for our next step in our pattern here, we're at step 2. We've pressed the 2 ends in 1/2 inch, and we're going to top stitch an 1/8 inch from raw edges. I notice how the pattern here shows just the 2 sides, but it's okay to go across the bottom too, and it's going to actually add more strength if we do that. I'm going to go ahead and do that 1/8 of an inch all the way around, including across the bottom. It's optional, but why not? I like to reinforce things. So now that's ready to go. Step 3, on the back of wall hanging, measure 1.5 inches down from the top and draw a line where the iron off pen. So we have our wall hanging here. The back side is up, and we're going to measure 1.5 inches down. Let's go on this side. I love my 1.5 inch line. Thank you, Creative Grid. And let's just measure that, draw that line all the way across. Okay. Then we're going to center the hanging sleeve right side up on the back of the wall hanging, and we're going to align the raw edges. So let's just find our center of our project. That's the quickest way, is you just kind of, where's the center of my project? You could even put a little bit of a wonder clip right there just to hold it. And the center of the sleeve. Marry those up. We'll take that to the sewing machine, and they say to, this is the raw edge up, by the way, an 1/8 inch seam allowance. So let's go ahead and sew that. Now this step is kind of a cool thing here. Like, how is this going to work? Well, I'm going to show you how it's going to work. On the next step, bring up the bottom of the sleeve so it lines up with the drawn line and hand stitch in place. So we see this here, right? So we're just going to draw that up slightly, and that's what's creating that space for the bar, or the wood, I would say, kind of dowel, to slide through there. So this is a step where you just grab a coordinating thread, go ahead and put a knot in there, and I'm just going to kind of bury that there. And you're just going to whip stitch that closed all the way down. So just a whip stitch, anything to go ahead and get that tacked across the bottom. I'll quickly do that. We can fast forward through the video to that step. Okay, so our hanging sleeve is done. That doesn't take very long to whip stitch that closed. Now, what's great about really what's next, what's left, the only thing that's left now is to go ahead and put the binding, turn the binding over. So you can just press that over nicely. It gives a nice edge there. And that's where you can decide on whether you want to do that by machine, by hand, your preference. And that's where I love my wonder clips. I used to pin my binding down to the back with pins, and I'd like to pin the whole thing. No. And then I'd sit there and stitch it by hand, and it would invariably catch my clothes. I'd get poked. Wonder clips are wonderful. For smaller projects, I use the mini wonder clips. For larger quilts, I find I like the regular size. So you'll just turn that over to the back. And this is where our fantastic wonder clips come into play. Now, if you're going to be doing this by machine, I prefer to have the clear side, which is flat, on that side, okay? That way, if you do go ahead and stitch kind of in the ditch and catch the binding in the back, this just rides a lot smoother. Here, let me show you the profile of a wonder clip. This is not going to do well at all against the bottom of your, kind of that flat plate. I can't even think of the name of that. We've been here so long, I can't even think of the name of this. Kind of the table. This does not ride well. This is meant to ride along your machine smoothly. So keep that in mind whenever you put your wonder clips in. Now, if you're going to be sewing it by hand, I always sew, of course, from this side, and in that instance, you know, I just put the color on my side as you prefer, and then just you know, miter your corners as you've done, clip them. And isn't this cool how now this, whether you do this by hand or by machine, this binding will wrap right over the top of your hanging sleeve. You still have the option of sewing that down by machine because your dowel is going to be slipping in here and you'll finish up your project. So I know this has been a longer video. I didn't want to leave anything out except a little bit of the top quilting, which again, we've shown you some close-ups, some ideas, and hey, we'd love for you to send us photos of your project as you're making them. Top quilting, people can be inspired by you as well. Thank you so much. I am looking forward to bringing you the March wall hanging next month. If you haven't already subscribed, be sure to do that. I'll see you soon.